Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. 4 people were arrested by Scotland Yard as scores of protesters gathered outside the Indian High Commission in London for pre-planned protests and counter-demonstrations as India marked its 73rd Independence Day on Thursday. The situation witnessed a tense exchange between different groups. The anti-India protest organized by Pakistani groups and Sikh and Kashmiri separatist outfits was demarcated with metal barriers from a pro-India demonstration outside India House, during which placard-waving crowds disrupted the flow of traffic and chanted slogans. Indians and people of Indian origin gathered outside the Indian High Commission to celebrate Independence Day were abused and pelted with eggs and water bottles by Pakistan-sponsored protesters, which included separatist Sikhs. The protests in London and elsewhere show how desperate Pakistan is after the Indian government abrogated certain sections of Article 370. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze how Pakistan has stooped to a new low. Joining me on the program today are Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, retired Director, India Foundation; Jaydev Ranade, Security and Intelligence Expert; and Vivek Karju, former Ambassador. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. Your thoughts on this desperate move by Pakistan, because it has not gotten the kind of response that it would have liked from the international community. So using all means possible to try and rake up this issue abroad.
You're absolutely right. The Pakistanis have been very, very disappointed at the lack of international interest in whatever they've been trying to propagate about the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. This is also part of the same attempt to whip up demonstrations abroad, and indeed the goonish behavior of the demonstrators only establishes that Pakistan is absolutely desperate and it's scratching the bottom. You will also note, Frank, that Pakistan had decided to mark India's Independence Day as a black day, and it had said that it had dedicated its Independence Day, that's August 14th, as Kashmir Solidarity Day. Now there are 2 points here. One is that the Kashmir Solidarity Day, of course, is a signal to the Kashmiris and to the international community, and also to their own people, that Pakistan will pursue its agenda, Kashmir agenda. But the second point is that I do not think I can remember any country marking the Independence Day of any other country, leave alone a neighbor, as a black day. This is never done in interstate relations. It shows a lack of courtesy, it shows a kind of venom which the Pakistanis have exhibited all over, and this, they haven't perhaps realized that this kind of observance can only embitter relations, not for now but for a long, long time to come. Because a day of celebration for India, if that is marked as a black day in Pakistan, then it shows a depth of enmity which I think no Indian can overlook. And this only establishes, and this is my last point, this only establishes, which Pakistani scholars themselves, like Hussain Haqqani, say is anti-Indianism, which is part of the Pakistan state DNA, and which is one of the pillars, along with Islam, which forms the ideology of Pakistan, or the Nazariya-e-Pakistan. Now, we in India have often overlooked these things because we find it passing strange that a country should exhibit such abnormality. But now we must realize that we are dealing with a neighbor which is an abnormal neighbor.
Right.
In fact, I believe it's a neurotic neighbor. And we know that it's not only individuals, but also countries which can go through neurotic phases, and Pakistan is going through an extreme phase of neurosis as of now.
Absolutely. All right. Mr. Ranade, the use of thugs and goons, is it something that is new to Pakistan, or has this happened? Because in the past also we've heard of similar kind of incidents taking place, but we've seen it again on Independence Day, which is, which is unprecedented, like the ambassador has just pointed out, and this is something that you wouldn't like to see between neighbors.
I think I'll just add to what Vivek Karju said about the behavior and the DNA of Pakistan. I think the mask, on Imran Khan's face has been removed now. All this talk about wanting peace, I think this shows exactly what his real feelings are. And don't forget, it was his minister, Bukhari, I think, who gave the call for a Black Independence Day, marking it there. Coming to your point about use of thugs, etc., this is not the first time that Pakistan has organized paid demonstrations, and I stress the word paid, in various cities. This was a large one in London, and I don't know how it was mobilized, but it was. But Pakistan has people who are, let's say, ISI funded or ISI personnel stationed in many of these places who keep links in order to raise crowds. This has happened in Washington, this has happened in London, and in fact there was their man in Washington is the one looking after all this, where they drum up these crowds in order to show the support for either Kashmir or an anti-Indian posture. Same thing they do outside the UN building. So it's not new. And you will recall how one of the Kashmiri leaders here, Lone, was killed or assassinated soon after he returned from a trip to USA. So they're well coordinated, and I think it just shows that they're getting back to those days after a suspension of a while, indicating that I think this animus has escalated between the two countries, not only the political establishments but also otherwise. And I might mention one more point, the last point, that actually, considering the effort that Pakistan put in, the kind of demonstrations that took place, except for London, were pretty small. I mean, they would have normally pumped in a lot more money. So either their enthusiasm is flagged, or they haven't been that effective. So I'll leave it at that. But I think a lot that the Pakistanis themselves need to get worried about.
Absolutely. Mr. Ranade has left it at that, but that's a point that I'd like to take forward, General. Similar kind of protests were organized elsewhere around the world as well. Several reports have come through, some in Washington, D.C. as well, but they haven't been as successful as the one in London. Could it at the end of the day also be because the administration in London did not want to quell the protests?
Yeah, in fact, I'm rather surprised at the role of the Mayor of London. I think he has played a very, very negative role, and there are reports to suggest that he was party to the whole issue. I think if London has come down to that stage by which the Mayor gets involved in these squabbles, so to say, I think it's a very sad day for Britain. It used to be called Great Britain. It's Britain now, and I don't know, in future it may become a Little Britain or whatever it is. But I think the role which the British government is playing, I think they need to be very cautious about which way they are going. Just a few thoughts on what has been said by my colleagues earlier. There is a very strange principle in law when a senior lawyer is briefing his junior client, his junior colleague, and telling him how to fight a case. And they always state that, listen, if your case is strong, tell the judge about the law, speak about the law. When your case is weak, shout, thump the table, create a nuisance, divert the issue. Now here, what we are finding out is when India on 5th of August abrogated certain provisions of 370 and made it into merged the state, getting the very liberal laws of India to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which actually I think had been handicapped for a very, very long time. Slowly and steadily, the people will realize that they were handicapped and they will change. Now, I think we have to take off from there that once we have come down to a stage by which the complete game has changed now, Pakistan never ever anticipated something like this happening. So they went around the world pleading that India has done something illegal, least realizing that everything which the government of India did was within the ambit of the constitution, and it was approved by both the houses with a 2/3 majority. That means we had not just was it good in law, it was also something which was approved by the people of India. So having said that, now Pakistan didn't anticipate something like this. They were not prepared for it. So they went to certain ridiculous things. They said, we stop trade. You stopped the bus. You stopped the train which was coming at the Samjhauta Express. You stopped it at Atari and you said it won't go beyond. Then we had to send our driver to get the train. Every small, petty little issue they continued with. And ultimately, it was those petty issues which are going to hurt them only. It doesn't make a difference to India. The only person whom it will make a difference to is the people of Pakistan. But I think they have gone on to such a course that it is going to be very difficult for them to come back. Imran Khan has to tell his people that we are capable of doing something. His president has also gone on to make some very radical statements threatening India with war, least realizing that they don't have any conventional capability, and the only capability they have is to ratchet up terrorist violence within India. We'll take care of that. But the point is that is all that they can do. And they know their limitations. They have very serious problems of internal security within their own country. And the outreach which they did to the OIC, to the United States, and to other world capitals just didn't fetch them any dividends. Even China gave a half-hearted reply by which they raised concerns only with respect to Ladakh. Even there they didn't mention Jammu and Kashmir. And now, of course, the matter will be discussed in the UNSC, I think later tonight. But I think they have really lost the plot. And now they have come to a screaming, slamming match. It is something like a little boy who has not got his toffee and who's trying to create a nuisance to his mother and saying, I want it, I want it. And knowing fully well that nothing is going to happen. So they have reached to that stage, and I agree with Ambassador Kaju. I think what they are doing is something which is very childlike, which is something which no self-respecting country will stoop down to. They have stooped down to abysmally low levels.
Right.
And I think that is a sign of concern.
Sure. Ambassador, I wanted to speak to you about the point that the General has just raised about this closed-door meeting in the UN that China wanted, and China said that it would like to have a closed-door meeting of the UN as far as the Kashmir issue is concerned. What role does UN have in all of this? Can the UN do something? And what exactly happens in these closed-door meetings?
Well, the Pakistanis have written to the president of the UN Security Council, and the chair at the moment is held by Poland, that they want an emergency session of the council to be held because there is threat to international peace and security. No one bought that because quite clearly our diplomatic effort to show that what we've done is within the domestic sphere of India has more or less been agreed to by almost everyone. And in any case, I think there is no appetite today in the international community to really enter into India-Pakistan issues or intervene in India-Pakistan issues over a resolution of J&K. That is why all countries say that this is a bilateral issue which India and Pakistan has resolved bilaterally through negotiations, and the UN Secretary General, while he misread Simla completely in his the Simla agreement completely in his statement, he also mentioned Simla and the bilateral approach, along with naturally being the UN Secretary General. He also said that there were UN resolutions on this issue. So what the Pakistanis have tried failed, but the Chinese, and I think this is an important point, irrespective of the Wuhan spirit, the Chinese have a very, very long strategic partnership which is growing with Pakistan, and we must be aware of this. We must be aware of the China-Pakistan nexus. Jaidev is an expert on these issues, and I'm sure he'll cast more light. But I, for one, am convinced that It is this nexus that's going to pose the major strategic problems for us, and it is now in play even as we speak. So what the Chinese did, they approached the the UNSC president, Poland, and said that they didn't ask for or endorse the Pakistani desire to have an emergency session, open session of the council, but they suggested that informal consultations can be held. And informal consultations are held by the council on all kinds of issues, especially on an issue like this. If someone, a permanent member of the council, asks the president, let's have informal issues, they're going to have informal issues. And in these informal consultations that will be held today, each country will state its position. Now, the important thing is that for a council meeting to be invoked, there has to be the agreement of 9 members of the Security Council, and I think it is almost impossible to conceive that 9 members of the Council will ask the President to have a full meeting of the Security Council. So the Chinese and the Pakistanis are going to be disappointed at the end of the day. At most, I expect that people will make general comments on the need to preserve peace and security, on the need that human rights are secure,
right.
that that things should come back to normal as soon as possible. Which brings me to this point, that ultimately international attention will not turn on the steps that we've taken constitutionally. It will turn on the ground situation in Jammu and Kashmir, especially in the Kashmir Valley.
Right.
And there will be, I'm afraid, as I foresee, and this is being realistic, and I think one needs to be realistic in these matters, a greater and greater focus on the Kashmir Valley situation. And I've seen some reports today that the government has decided that the situation will ease, and as it is today too, I was seeing reports on television that there has been movement of vehicular traffic, and in some parts of Srinagar that the restrictions that were imposed are now being gradually lifted. All that is welcome.
Okay, all right. Mr. Ranade, let's talk about the Pakistan-China axis now. So the ambassador believes that after the Wuhan warmth, it's not very warm anymore, and it looks like the Chinese are back to their old games. Should we be wary of what China and Pakistan could do combined?
Very, very indeed. In fact, I do not endorse what various sections of the media have said about this warmth and back to a love fest after Wuhan 1. It was certainly to de-escalate temperatures and to try and put the relations back on a good track, which is what it was intended to achieve, and it did. But the China-Pakistan relationship is very deep and very old, and it is a politico-economic, military and nuclear relationship. So it covers all spectrum, and their common focus is India. It's negative towards India. But coming specifically to Kashmir, there is a convergence of interest between Pakistan and China on Kashmir. And here let me just run through a couple of points. China has claimed Ladakh. In May 2013, they reiterated their claim on Ladakh, and in fact on the whole of J&K. 2010, as you recall, they stopped issuing visas to citizen J&K, and even now they do not. And on the 7th of August, that is just 2 days after we took the action about amending Article 370 and abolishing 335A, there was a post on Weixin, which is the Chinese version of WhatsApp, which repeated virtually in brief the article of May 2013, where it laid claim to the entire portion of Ladakh. It said that it cited similarities of culture, language, etc. And it said someday we will get it back. So they have again said. So the main issue, I think, here is while China has tried to underplay to some extent their reaction, They have put it on the table that they are concerned about what is happening, and obviously unsaid, but certainly in the back of their mind, the status of the portion of Ladakh that they have invaded and occupied. This was the dominant topic when our External Affairs Minister went there. He gave a good response. And I think they have now gone to the UN Security Council for this informal discussion to try and see whether they can rake it up or stir the pot a little bit more. I think the fact that they've taken it up is something that requires us to really think long and hard about the relationship with China, about how we should play it. Certainly we should, where no one is looking for a conflagration, but I think China should also be made aware that at a time when their economy is shrinking and they're beginning to hurt, they need a huge market here, which we are. And when they're trying to pressure us, you must have read that news item about that summoning our ambassador about the Huawei's 5G. Well, I think in any case, it's not something that I would recommend because they have a common border. Our relations are not that of friends. But I think these are things we need to think about and make it clear that we're thinking about.
Right, absolutely. You know, talking about Pakistan's desperation and Pakistan stooping to a new low, General, I mean, I for one was surprised by the kind of language that the Pakistani political establishment used over the last few days, really unbecoming of any kind of politician anywhere in the world.
You know, surprisingly that this language is the language of hate which has been coming out from political leaders. And one of the statements which one of their people made on national television
was like
on
chopping
Pakistan.
off hands and so on and so forth.
No, they very specifically said, any Hindu going to Kashmir, you have the right to kill him. I mean, can you make such statements on national television? And you have had their politicians making similar statements. You have had Imran Khan actually threatening nuclear war. You see, for a politician of that stature, of course, he didn't say we are going to nuke India, but he gave adequate hints. He said we are nuclear powered. Now, what does that mean, we are nuclear powered? It means he's trying to give a blackmail message. He's trying to give a message to India, we have got the bomb, be careful. Their president has made a similar statement. So, unfortunately for them, they are speaking to the wrong country. India is not going to be cowed down by such statements. We have called their nuclear bluff earlier when the surgical strike was carried out in 2016. We called the nuclear bluff for the second time in a much more aggressive manner in 2019 when the strike on Balakot took place. And both times, Pakistan was left floundering. I think after the abrogation of certain provisions of 370 and the abrogation of 35A, and more importantly, splitting of that state into two, making Ladakh into a union territory without a legislature and Jammu and Kashmir into a union territory with a legislature. I think that has hurt them a great deal because in my opinion, what is going to happen now is Pakistan is going to find it very difficult to reactivate those linkages which they had with the Hurriyat, and the ISI is going to find it extremely difficult to penetrate because now it is not the law of the Ranbir Penal Code which is going to be applicable. It is going to be the IPC, the Indian Penal Code, and it is going to be the Constitution of India which is going to be applicable in the state. The police powers as of now rest with the centre. So all those things which they were actually banking on for support, that has gone. The banking sector, the Jammu and Kashmir Bank, that has also played a very, I can use the word nefarious role because a lot of money laundering took place through that bank. Now, all those issues are also going to come up on the table. And every bit of corruption which has taken place, especially financial transactions involving support to terrorism, which has been carried out by political parties, that is going to be laid open and shown to the public. There's one more aspect which I think many people are missing out.
Right.
I think when we are looking at the political situation in Kashmir Valley, specific to the Kashmir Valley, there is a feeling that the people that the political parties are really the regional political parties and perhaps the Hurriyat, which has got a great deal of influence. The Hurriyat's influence rests there. It is a very powerful influence because they are hand in glove with the terrorist organizations and those people have the guns. So that gives them the power. Otherwise, if you have an election, they will lose out. But what has happened over the past 2 years, you see the panchayat elections have been held and a new ground level political force are emerging.
Right.
I think these people are very, very concerned about those political forces emerging.
Sure.
And if the Indian state can channelize that energy and get these political forces where they deserve to be, you will find a new political voices emerging in Kashmir, and all of them are very, very proactive voices.
Right.
They will support the state.
Sure.
That
Sure.
is of concern to Pakistan.
Okay. Closing comments now from all my guests. I've got limited time on the program. Ambassador, I saw you putting up your hand first, so let me start with you. Go ahead.
Look, I will not enter into a debate with General Saab on the points that he has mentioned. I think what he has said, much of it is correct. But let us not forget that Pakistan has developed intrusive capabilities in the Kashmir Valley in particular over the decades. And we have we failed, and that's a fact, we failed in staunching the flow of that contaminant. I only hope that with the present new structure that we are putting in place, it will be of assistance in doing that. But let us not forget that when contaminant flows, it doesn't flow through legal structures. It flows through extra-legal and illegal structures. And that is where we've got to focus our attention on.
Sure. Let's hope that the new system will sort out all those issues as well. Yes, Mr. Ranade?
Well, I'd just like to add to the points made by the General and Vivek that with this abrogation of or amendment of 370 and removal of 35A, what the government has done is it has also neutralized quite a, I would say, sizable and influential lobby that Pakistan had nurtured over the years, which called for retention of the old systems in Kashmir, etc. And I think that is a big blow to Pakistan. The second thing is what he was rightly mentioning, that when contaminants flow, they also affect the others. I think a substantive move has already been made by tackling the Hawala transactions and by tackling some of these drug businesses and the illegal laundering that's going on. And I think now they will be stepped up, because it will be the center which will deploy its forces and try and sort these problems out. So I think we are quite well on the way to tackling these problems, and hopefully it will be peaceful and it will be soon.
You know, General, as we continue to frustrate Pakistan time and again and, on a daily basis, is a desperate Pakistan now going to try some misadventure?
I think what we need to do, a certain group of people must start thinking as to what are the possibilities which Pakistan can do, which may surprise us. And they may do something which really we haven't thought of. We need to be prepared and at least war game it in our minds. That is the only way to keep one step ahead of what they may do. So before they plan anything, I think we should actually be doing things on the ground so that whatever they plan is rendered infructuous even otherwise. My point really wasn't to say that earlier when I had spoken that the situation is going to be rosy. All that I'm trying to say is that there were people in the valley who were operating with a certain degree of impunity. Now that impunity is over. And I think, with the brazenness with which things were being done, with the brazenness which hate was being preached in the mosques, with the brazenness with which the courts were functioning, I think all that is history now. Even the local media, the limited edition of the papers which would come out, even that was very brazen. All that is history now. The degree of difficulty has increased, but that doesn't mean that our task is over. We have simply taken the first step. And I think the other steps are going to follow over the next 1 decade to really get the state back to where we need to be. And I'm absolutely certain that if we continue on the path which we are going, we will reach there.
So we are up to the challenge is what you're suggesting.
Yes.
It's going to be a difficult road ahead, but that's not going to be a problem. We're going to sort it out with time. On that note, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests.